Chapter 1. The Bowl. The church was empty. The cold walls of the ancient building smelled of wax, old wood, and something else subtle, barely perceptible, like iron. Blood. Candles burned in wrought iron candlesticks, casting trembling shadows on the icons, turning the faces of the saints into something disturbing. The air stood still, like water in a musty well. There was no sound except the occasional crackle of fire and footsteps. The man was lying at the altar, on the back. The head is thrown back unnaturally. The mouth is slightly open. His face was frozen in surprise, not fear. Her arms are folded neatly across her chest. A white shirt without a single crease. It was as if he had been placed like an icon in a showcase. Maria Koval was kneeling next to the body, shining a flashlight into the dead man's face. There was still life under the skin. It had only recently left. There was a mark on his forehead, clear, fresh, as if carved with one confident movement, a semicircle from which a straight line rose up, like a glass, like a bowl, or like a vessel from which something is pouring, blood, tears, wine. A chalice for reckoning. Is Seraph coming? What is it? She asked without turning around. On my way. He said don't let anyone touch it. One of the young patrolmen replied. The voice was trembling. He was as pale as the walls of this church. Maria stood up, taking off her gloves. Her eyes remained calm, like a doctor's at an autopsy. But something was starting to itch inside. This label, the fourth, the same sign, the same pose, almost the same setting. Only the places are different. There used to be a bathroom, a train station, a library. Now it's a temple. Who found him? The watchman. I went to put candles on. They say his mother died. I found the body called. They're holding him downstairs now. He's hysterical. He says he saw someone coming out, wearing a hood. Maria just nodded. In the hood. Sure. The killer clearly didn't want to be remembered. Or vice versa. He left just as much as he needed for mystery. Every step seems to be pre-staged. At that moment, the heavy door opened. The cold rushed through her into the temple. And with him, Artyom Seraph. He always appeared like a storm. He was short, thick-set, with gray temples, and had short hair. Eyes of steel. In the coat, he seemed to have been born in. Seraph didn't waste his words. He was the kind of guy who thought more than he talked, and he did it with frightening precision. Good morning, he said dully, and went straight to the body. Although the morning hasn't started yet, Maria added. He crouched down, examining the victim's face. The same thing, he said softly. It's the same. Clear. Symmetrical. Almost with love. He looked at Maria. Where did he find it? This mark. In the mind or in hell? She didn't answer. I just returned my gaze to the body. Name? Seraph asked. Vitaly Nestorov. 52 years old. Lawyer. They found the documents in his jacket pocket. We haven't tried it before. He's not connected to any of the previous victims. At first sight, Seraph straightened up and walked down the aisle, looking at the walls. I didn't choose the church by chance. Now he's playing. A confession? Or a verdict, said Maria. The right. He stopped, thinking. Then he said, the fourth mark. The executioner began his ritual. But why the cup? She looked at the symbol again. Maybe a cup of anger? Seraph nodded. Or the cup of sin. If so, there will be a fifth soon. And then we will have to understand how many bowls this God has in total. Silence filled the space again. This time it's dead. Chapter 2. The list. Early morning found them in the department. The windows were still dark, not from the night, but from the autumn grayness, in which everything seemed to be covered with soot. There were lamps inside. Seraph was sitting with his face buried in the case file. Maria was pouring black coffee into 2 plastic cups. Bitter, she said, holding one out. How are you? He muttered and took it. There were photographs on the board behind him. For portraits. For victims. There are brief summaries under each one. Name, age, profession, date of death, place. And between them is the same hand, drawn symbol, a bowl with a vertical line. Nestorov, lawyer, private practice. He worked in the field of inheritance, conducted high-profile cases. No direct connection to the other victims. Generally, Maria ran her finger down the list. The first is Irina Meshcherskaya, a librarian. The second is Boris Klyavin, a civil engineer. The third is Pavel Vronsky, a former prosecutor. And now Nestorov is a lawyer, Sarah repeated. 4. No obvious connection. But if you dig deep. He got up, walked over to the blackboard, and stared at the faces. Everyone is different, but everyone is a person with access to information, to someone else's truth, system, law, memory, and now the inheritance. Do you think he's taking revenge? Maria asked. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. Maybe. Or he holds his own trial. But by what rules? He turned away from the blackboard and walked to his desk. That's the thing. We're looking for a connection between the victims, but maybe we should look for a connection between their actions. He threw the folder with the Vronsky case on the table. The prosecutor. He quit after a high-profile case. There were rumors that they were hushed up quietly. I've been reading. There was a story about planted evidence. And the librarian? Meshcherskaya Street. I witnessed when someone burned a rare fund. The testimony is against a businessman who was later acquitted. Klyavin. I was building a house where the balcony collapsed. 2 people died. He was acquitted. Sarah stood up. That's the answer. They were all accomplices. Not formally. They were silent, closed their eyes, and handed out pieces of paper. Everything is in its own way. The killer considers them guilty. Then he's not a maniac. He's the judge, Maria said, and her voice became quieter. Sarah shook his head. The judge? No, I am the judge, and he's the executioner. He passes sentences that he considers fair, according to their own laws. And each label is an announcement of an execution. Maria's phone vibrated on the table. She replied. She listened and was silent. Then she hung up. Another bell? Local television. I received an email to the editorial office. Without a signature. The attachment is an excerpt from the Revelation of John. Chapter 16. The 7 bowls of God's wrath. Sarah sat down again. So we'll have 7 bodies. He slowly leaned back in his chair. And we are just at the beginning. Chapter 3. The 16th. The rain started suddenly. Not noisy, not torrential, but persistent. He was tapping on the glass of the office, as if trying to get inside, to get to the very thoughts. Sarah stood at the window and watched the drops roll down, leaving trails behind them. He was holding a printout in his hand, the text of a letter that had been sent to the editorial office of a local TV channel. And I heard a loud voice from the temple, saying to the 7 angels, Go and pour out the 7 bowls of God's wrath on the earth. Revelation 16 verse 1. There's nothing underneath it. No signature, no threats, no demands. Just a verse. Just a glimmer of ancient justice, cast in a virtual drop. Maria approached him, holding a tablet in her hands. I checked the address from which the email was sent. Via VPN, routes through 4 countries. Classic. It is almost impossible to restore. And the editorial office? The journalist, Anna Levina, was the first to open the letter. She says she thought it was a threat, so at first she decided not to report it. But after the news about the body in the church, I tied it up. The style is too similar. They had archives on the Klyavin case. Do you think it's not accidental? Sarah nodded. He's following the news. Or follow us. Or maybe both. He took the tablet and scrolled through the latest publications. A few notes. Body found in temple. Killer leaves symbols. New victim. All in the spirit of urban media. Noise. Panic. Clicks. Perfect fuel for a religious fanatic, he muttered. Or for an avenger tired of silence. Sarah turned to the blackboard. He took out a red marker and drew the number 4 under the chalice symbol. Then he wrote next to it, Revelation ch16, 7 bowls. If it follows the structure of the chapter, he said, each cup corresponds to a specific punishment. According to the Bible, the first is ulcers. The second is blood in the sea. The third is blood in the rivers. The fourth is that the sun burns. The fifth is darkness. The sixth is the drying up of the great river. Seventh, thunder and earthquake. But we don't see a literal connection yet, Maria added. No ulcers, no sun. The murders take place in a symbolic space. Serav narrowed his eyes. Not a literal connection, but a symbolic one, quite. The first victim is a memory ulcer, a librarian. The second is an engineer, a sea of blood, a collapse. The third is the prosecutor, the river of guilt. The fourth is the church, light, the sun. Maria thought about it. So the fifth one will be in the dark. The darkness? Maybe. Or maybe it's blinding, cutting off the truth. The basement? Tunnel? Serav took out another folder and opened the list of people who had been involved in the hushed-up cases of recent years. There are 86 surnames in total. He quickly flipped through the first 2 pages, stopping at one. Here, Savely Ignatov, lawyer. He delayed the case of domestic violence. The woman died. Her husband never sat down. Maria took the surname to work. I'll check where he lives, where he works, who surrounds him. Do it faster. If the executioner chose him, we only have a couple of days. He looked at the number 4 drawn on the blackboard again. Soon there will be 5 of them, and there will be even less time. Savely Ignatov lived in a new apartment complex on the southern outskirts of the city. Shiny facades, glass loggias, guards at the barrier and cameras in every corridor. A cozy showcase behind which rotten morality was hidden. Serav and Maria were sitting in an inconspicuous car in the parking lot opposite. It was getting close to midnight. The courtyard was emptying. The light in the windows was slowly fading, like the eyes of a dying man. He always comes back at 2100 hours, Maria said quietly, looking at the tablet with the videos. He didn't come back today. Serav was silent. He stared at the entrance door without blinking. A plastic coffee lid dangled in his fingers. Call the precinct officer. Have them check if he was at work. She nodded, dialed the number, and after a couple of minutes turned back to Serav. He didn't show up at work. The phone is unavailable. Colleagues say he's been strange these days, silent, tense. He asked for a vacation. Serav got out of the car, slammed the door, and headed for the entrance. Let's go in. 10 minutes later, they were already at Ignatov's apartment. The door was opened by a patrolman on duty. The lock was not broken. Everything was in order. There was no sign of a struggle, no disorder. Just a strange feeling of emptiness. It's too quiet. It's too clean. Maria noticed it first. Artyom. He stood in the hallway and looked at the mirror. A symbol is drawn on it, with your finger on the glass. Not blood, not a marker, just condensation. Bowl, but with 2 lines diverging upward, like horns, or a fork. The 5th mark? Serav ran his finger over the drawing. It was still fresh. Someone had left it quite recently. He was here, Maria whispered. Or Ignatov himself, the executioner. He came and went. Or is it still here? They checked the apartment. No one. No notes. No new evidence. Just this sign, and it feels like someone is watching. Serav sat on the edge of the sofa, clasping his hands. He's ahead of us. This is a warning. It's a challenge. Maria looked around the room. Why didn't you kill him? He almost always does everything quickly. Maybe something went wrong. No, Serav said slowly. He's waiting. Is playing. He knows we're here. He left the sign on purpose. He drives a wedge between the victim and us. Maria went to the window and looked down. Cars, wet asphalt, quiet streets. Not a soul. Do you think he's watching? I am sure. He got up and headed for the exit. We have one night. If Ignatov is still alive, we have less than 12 hours. Maria froze. The fifth bowl. Dark. We're already in it. Chapter 5. Light in the dark. 1:43. The city was sleeping, pulling a blanket of asphalt and fog. Serov was standing on the bridge above the railway, next to a parked car. He didn't like night operations. They smelled like failure. But this time there was no choice. It's surfaced, Maria said, getting out of the car with her phone. Ignatov was seen at the old station, in the underpass at the platform. One, or more than one, Serov replied. The subway. Dark. The fifth bowl. They rode in silence. The old railway station has not worked for a long time. It has been closed for several years for reconstruction, which has not yet begun. The cameras are disabled. There are 0 guards. A legendary place for ghosts, drug addicts, and executioners. They entered through a side gate. The lanterns are almost all broken. The wind blew debris across the platform. The station was breathing death. Under the passage. On the right, said Maria. Serov nodded and took out a flashlight. The steps down were wet and slippery. Every step was a rumble. It was as if someone was already waiting downstairs. It was dark on the floor, and it smelled damp and rusty. There, Maria pointed with the beam, a figure, a human silhouette against the far wall. Serov went first, pistol at the ready. Ignatov. The police. Hands up. The voice sounded muffled, almost lost in the concrete bowl. The figure did not move. They came closer. The light illuminated the face. It was him, Savily Ignatov. Alive. Shaking. Covered in sweat. He was here. Ignatov whispered. He talked to me. Said. Who? Where is he? Serov abruptly got down on one knee, examining the corners. Maria? Clear. She shouted, running around the passage. He's gone. Just. Or left it. Serov grabbed Ignatov by the shoulders. What did he say? Do you remember? Ignatov whispered, looking at the floor. Do you remember how you signed the paper? You knew she wasn't coming back. You knew. And you sold it. And then he smiled. He was wearing a mask. Just the eyes. The green ones. They're crazy. Maria turned sharply. What kind of paper? Who was he talking about? Ignatov began to shake harder. I don't know. It was a long time ago. Woman, mother of 2. I convinced her not to go to court. I was paid for it. I didn't think she was. He paused. Serov stared into the darkness. He realized that the executioner had given the victim a chance for the first time and had not killed him. Why? Because she repented? Or was it because he was the observer? He looked around, and there was darkness, a hum, and nothing else. But my heart was beating like before a fight. Maria touched his elbow. Look at the wall. Serov directed the light. There was a new mark on the bare concrete wall, the 5th, and next to it is an inscription, scratched with something sharp. Darkness is not death. Darkness is judgment. Listen up. Serov narrowed his eyes. The killer changed the rules. It wasn't just murder anymore. It was a test. Who is worthy of death? Who is worthy of forgiveness? Chapter 6. Shadows of the Past. Serov was sitting in his office with the lights out. The dim light from the desk lamp cast long shadows on the walls, and they seemed alive, as if someone was watching him from those shadows. Maria went home, promising to return in the morning. He was left alone with a pile of documents and a heavy feeling in his heart. Ignatov stood before my eyes, shaking and lost. His words echoed in my head. Do you remember? You knew she wouldn't come back. Serov sighed and put his head in his hands. I remember, he said softly. Suddenly, his consciousness took him back 10 years. Autumn rain pattered on the glass of the investigator's office, where a young Serov interrogated a woman. She was crying. The voice was trembling. I didn't mean to. I thought I'd fix it. That you can hush it up. But no one fixed it, he said coldly then. That incident haunted him for many years. The woman died. Her children were orphaned. And then he swore, not a single hushed-up case. No victims without justice. Serov opened his eyes. He took a notebook and began to write down the details. Why did the executioner choose Ignatov? Why did you give it a chance? What connects him and the killer? Another thought burst into my mind. The sign on the mirror in Ignatov's apartment. 2 lines are like a fork, horns, or a symbol of choice. His gaze fell on an old photo on the table. He and his partner, back in his youth. Back then, he was sure that the world could be fixed. But now everything seemed broken. At that moment, the phone vibrated. Maria? Serov, I have new information. Tell me. Ignatov received threats earlier. But they're weird. Letters that talked about the trial and the verdict, without specifying the sender's name. Here's a copy. She sent a photo message. The trial is underway. You are the 5th cup. Make a choice. Otherwise, the darkness will consume you. Serov felt a chill. So the killer doesn't just kill, he tries to change people. To make her confess. To test. Or break it, Maria added. Serov realized that the game had reached a new level. He got up, went to the window, and looked out at the city, an endless series of windows, where each one could hide a new tragedy. We know he has a plan, he said softly. But he knows us. Otherwise, he would not have left us these signs. So he's somewhere nearby. Maybe even among us, Maria replied. Serov clenched his fists. Then it's time to look for him not only in business, but also in the shadows of the past. Chapter 7. The Ghost from the Past. The next day, Serov hardly left his office. He was sorting through old cases, looking at photographs, looking for at least the slightest hint. Every little thing seemed to be a clue. In the evening, there was a knock on the door. Come in, he said, trying to sound calm. A tall man in his 40s with a stern face and tired eyes entered. It was Igor Vlasov, Serov's former partner in the investigation. Their paths parted a few years ago after a high-profile case that ended tragically. You asked me to come. Vlasov looked at the mess of paper and photographs. Is something wrong? Serov nodded and invited him to sit down. The killer. He's playing by the rules of revelation. 7 bulls. 5 of them have already been released. And I think he knows me. Vlasov frowned. Does he know? How is that? I was also involved in the cases he uses, Serov replied. And those who were with me, too. He laid out Ignatov's photographs, symbols, and letters in front of Vlasov. This is not a random serial killer. It's someone from our past. Someone I knew. Vlasov thought about it. Are you sure you're not being paranoid? No. I feel. This man wants to punish not only the victims, but also me. And everyone who couldn't protect them. Vlasov sighed and sat down, looking out the window. Do you remember the Bragin case? The man who killed his wife and then disappeared? We gave him too little attention back then. The family died in the fire. No one is being punished. Yes, said Serov. This is the first link. Vlasov nodded. And now he's coming back to finish the job? And yet, he's not just a murderer. He's a judge. He wants us to admit mistakes, so that we can feel their pain. There was silence in the room. The lights of the evening lanterns began to light up outside the window, reflecting in the glass. What's next? Vlasov asked. I'm going to meet someone who might know more. She worked in the prosecutor's office, followed the case of Bragin. If she gives us the slightest clue, we'll find the executioner. Be careful, Vlasov warned. He's close, and he's smarter than you think. Serov got up and went to the table. Thank you, Igor. We'll stop him, or we'll die trying. That evening, after leaving the building, Serov felt someone's eyes on him. The same coldness that remained from the writing and symbols. He turned around and saw no one. But in the shadows around the corner, a figure in black flashed by, indistinct but determined. He knew that the game had really started. Chapter 8. The Woman in the Shadow. The morning was cold and gray, as if the sky itself had a premonition of the coming storm. Sarah arrived at the old prosecutor's office building. Inside, there was a smell of paper and antiquity. Each corridor held hundreds of unsolved stories. Her name was Ekaterina Melnikova, a former investigator who was close to the truth at the beginning of the investigation of Bragin, but disappeared from the process for mysterious reasons. He found her in her office with only one light on. The woman looked up, her eyes tired but sharp as a blade. "Are you Investigator Serev?" "What is it?" she asked, without getting up from her chair. "Yes, I need your help. Do you know the Bragin case? It destroyed me, and a lot more. How many years have passed?" Her voice faltered. "What do you know about the man who now calls himself the executioner?" Ekaterina fell silent, as if struggling with herself. "I was close to solving it then," she said finally, "but the authorities ordered the investigation to be curtailed. There were two influential figures, and a lot of dirt." She pulled a folder out of the drawer. "Everything that we managed to collect is here. The connection with the one who calls himself the executioner is very subtle, but it is there." Sarah flipped through the papers, photographs, and reports. "Is there anyone among them who could make himself a judge and an executioner?" "Yes. This is a man who has suffered a loss," Ekaterina said. "He was on the verge of madness, and now he seeks justice in his own way." She looked straight into Serev's eyes. "Be careful. He's not just a serial killer. He is your opponent, your shadow." After leaving the prosecutor's office, Serev felt his heart tighten. He knew that the cat-and-mouse game had reached a new stage, and that he had become not just an observer, but the main figure. The night was already approaching, and with it, the inevitable meeting with the executioner. Chapter 9. Crossroads of Fate. The night enveloped the city in a dense blanket, cut only by streetlights and rare cars. Serev walked through the deserted streets, immersed in thoughts and memories. Every step echoed, as if the city itself breathed expectation. His phone was ringing in his pocket, a new message from the executioner. He wasn't used to receiving such messages in person. It was a challenge. Message: "You're walking on thin ice, detective. Every step is crucial. Look at those you thought were innocent. The label has already been selected." Serev stopped. Something pinched inside. It was not just a warning, but an attempt to shake the foundations of his faith in justice. He raised his head and looked at the nearest intersection, the one where one of the victims had been found a few weeks ago. There was also that mark, neatly scratched on the pillar, the fourth bowl. Suddenly, someone walked by, slowing down, looking at him out of the corner of his eye. Serev felt a slight chill down his spine. When he returned to the station, he carefully studied the cases of the latest victims. It was impossible to ignore the message. He noticed a thin thread connecting all the stories. Everyone was accused of moral or legal crimes, but they did not have a chance in court. Someone closed their eyes. Someone refused to consider the evidence. He realized that the executioner not only kills, he makes a choice. And each mark is not just a symbol, but a sentence. The judge and the executioner in one person. Maria came in with a cup of coffee. "Is there any news?" "The executioner wants us to face our mistakes," he replied. "And he makes us doubt everyone." She sat down next to him. "We're on the edge. If we don't catch him, he'll keep killing. But if we do, then who are we? Judges or executioners?" There was a tense silence in the room. Chapter 10. The game begins. The night was gathering over the city like a thick, inky curtain. The abandoned industrial area seemed dead, swallowed up by silence and the ghostly light of rare lanterns. In this oblivion, among the rusty structures and cracked walls, the hunt began. Serev and Maria settled down in the shade of a collapsed warehouse. Its cold concrete seemed cursed, and the air was saturated with the smell of burning and dampness. "Are you sure this is the right place?" Maria asked quietly, clutching a flashlight and a pistol in her hands. Yes, a fresh mark was found here, the sixth bowl. It is different, an inverted pyramid, like a sign of an upcoming coup. They were hiding in a narrow shadow between two walls, illuminated only by the dim yellow glow of the neon sign, building materials. Every sound resonated, as if the sound of footsteps could be the last. The clock on the phone showed 2:17. Sarah felt his heart beating faster, but he tried to keep his breathing steady. At that moment, footsteps were heard outside. A figure in a black cloak stepped out of the darkness, the hood pulled deep over his face, which was hidden by a mask, smooth, with almost no features, except for cold eyes that sparkled in the semi-darkness. The executioner. He walked slowly, purposefully, as if dancing on the edge of reality and nightmare. There, Maria whispered, pointing her flashlight at the pole next to him. On the wooden pillar, peeling and corroded by time, there was a fresh mark, the sixth bowl, a symbol that Seraph saw in his most disturbing dreams. Seraph cautiously moved out of hiding. The police. Wait. The executioner stopped. His eyes met the detective's. The silence hung by a thread, broken only by the distant hum of the train. "You're late," the executioner said in a flat voice, as if without emotion. "The trial is already underway." Suddenly, he pulled out a knife from under his cloak, with a long, narrow blade that glittered in the lamplight. Maria grabbed the gun and fired. The sound of a gunshot broke the silence of the night, but the executioner, like a ghost, disappeared into the dark alleys, leaving behind only the rustle of footsteps and the barely audible smell of gunpowder. There was a new mark on the ground where he stood, the seventh bowl. But it was empty, like a harbinger of the unknown. Seraph bent down, examining the symbol. "What does that mean?" "What is it?" he whispered. Maria shook her head. "It's a challenge. Now he doesn't just kill. He plays. And we are his figures." Seraph looked around. The place seemed alive. The shadows were moving. The hum of the city came from everywhere and nowhere. He felt like the game had entered a new phase, with direct confrontation. "We can't let him slip away again," he said flatly. "We'll start the raid tomorrow." Maria nodded. "But this is just the beginning," she said. "He knows we're on his trail." Seraph looked at the empty mark and thought about those who had already become victims, and about those who were still ahead. He knew the stakes were higher now, and every step has a price.